And here we are, time now for the news review. We're joined by Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante. He is a political science lecturer, political scientist, and the head of the Center for European Studies. He joins us for this conversation. Before I usher him in, however, you know the segment is always brought to you by Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, and they are offering everybody free prostate screening if you're a man and free female fertility screening if you're a woman, of course. And you can locate them here in Accra at Spintex opposite the Shell signboard, in Kumasi, Kronum Abuehia behind the Angel Educational Complex, Takrade Anaji Estate. There is Tema Community 22. There is Techiman Hanswa and Esiama Enzema. If you'd like to give them a call, which you should, call them on these numbers: 0244 867 068 or 0274 234 321. Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, the end to chronic disease. But just the start of the news review. Doc, good morning. Welcome to Wednesday.
Good morning, Ben.
Good to have you as always. I hope you're well.
I'm good.
We thank the Lord for His grace and the beauty of another morning. As I would always do, I would like to pick your thoughts on any matters of great concern or any topical matters over the last week that you have, heard, maybe that you would like to share some thoughts on before we get into it. Of course, our economy, the situation with our economy is still on the front burner. We're talking about the IMF spring meeting. We're talking about developments there. We're talking about a number of matters related to that. What are your thoughts on some of these matters?
I will touch on the Human Rights Report on Ghana issued by the U.S. State Department. This is one of the important documents that guides governance in its totality. You and I know that in the 80s, late 80s to 90s, human rights was a problem in Africa to the extent that the World Bank, IMF, I'm talking about the Bretton Woods institutions, were not ready to offer us loan simply because of our human rights reports. You could also understand because at that time, the human rights issues were at its lowest ebb. You had all soldiers, almost all the continent of Africa was governed by soldiers, people in khaki, and the rest of them. So human rights reports was nothing to write home about. Thank God, the third wave of democracy swept the forces of authoritarian rule and were able to establish democracy and we build them gradually. Since then, from the 90s, all right, we've been able to, build a democracy and at the same time support the tenets of democracy, which includes human rights. Because investment will come into your country. One of the things they look at is your human rights report. So it's so critical. People want to do business with you. One of the things they watch is your democratic credentials as well as your human rights. So it's an important variable in the governance equation. We started off not on a good note from the 90s. If you have studied our report very well, you will agree with me that we started off and there were certain things that were always present, right? Human rights abuse in the area of detention, illegal arrest, torture, the rest of them. Later we had, child abuse, children used in cocoa farms, fishing, and the rest of them. One would have thought that we will be improving by now. And it is true that some of the things that were featuring all the time, one or two have dropped. But that is not to say that we have a good report. More so when you have a president who is a human rights crusader and a champion. Growing up in the 90s, I saw the president, my president, and he was very apt on human rights issues. He would defend you on gratis and the rest of them. And so it becomes an indictment that during his time, we have such reports on us. I believe the president has taken note of this, and he wants his government to work on this seriously. It is not the case that he perpetuated those, crimes, but once he is a leader, all blames will go to him, as well as praises if there are any. So I will urge the government to work on this thing immediately, because the more it stays, it becomes more complex, and more human rights abuses will be recorded from time to time. This is not the country that we want. If you look at our democratic credentials, we've done so well, and that this is going to be a blot on our democratic credentials. I believe that well-meaning Ghanaians, including your president, my president, would take political notice of this, of course, and work on it so that we improve human rights. Without human rights, you can live to become the best of yourself. It is not for fun that we have emphasis on human rights. It defines everything. Your economic livelihoods, your survival, your very existence as a human being, all captured in human rights. So human rights report is the sine qua non. That is without which not. Without human rights report or human rights, you can live as a human being. I would urge the government to strengthen the frontiers and make sure that we have a clean record next time.
All right, so sanitize our human rights dispensation and boost our fortunes in that regard. And of course, some of the matters cited there rather problematic. But let's get into the newspapers now. The Ghanaian Times: flood mitigation efforts, government to halt encroachment on water bodies nationwide, housing ministry, national security join forces to deal with growing menace. Flooding it's now become our bane, year in, year out, perennial problem. We'll be finding out what exactly government is going to be doing about it. Well, the housing ministry, and of course, it is a national security concern. We'll be looking at the details of that. President cuts sought for €5 million vaccine manufacturing factory at mid-year. And he also seized the opportunity to take a swipe at those who said it wouldn't happen, or those who said that it was a bit ambitious. It appears with everything, some jabs must flow, whether from the opposition or the current administration. Well, once it's in the offing, we just hope that it will be completed and that we can get to the results as a people. $132 million needed to fight HIV annually in Ghana. That is according to Dr. Etiahene. I'll give you a briefing on that. And consider increasing concessional financing to Africa, Bank of Ghana urges IMF. Consider increasing concessional financing to Africa. And of course, we find ourselves in dire straits as far as seeking an IMF program is concerned, our economy, and now we have to get to the IMF. And finally, woman 35 grabbed at Kotoka International Airport over alleged smuggling of $309,120 worth of cocaine. We brought you that story yesterday. I think her name is Injeri Mary. Well, let's get into the stories now. We'll start from page 12. And the Ministry of Works and Housing is to join forces with the Ministry of National Security to clamp down on encroachment on the Kweshi wetlands and other water bodies across the country. Additionally, the ministry is engaging its counterpart in charge of local government decentralization and rural development to enhance support for assemblies in dealing with the challenge of buildings on waterways and drainage buffers. According to the Minister of Works and Housing, Francis Asenso-Boakye, the moves have become necessary due to a growing human activity, which is undermining efforts by the government to address flooding within the Greater Accra region and other parts of the country. Addressing a press conference in Accra yesterday, he cited the filling of lagoons and wetlands with construction materials for development purposes as one of the human activities impeding flood control. Let me just add this story and you'll react to the two before we take another two. Now, about $132 million is required to provide a full range of human immunodeficiency virus services annually in Ghana, says the Director General of the Ghana AIDS Commission, Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante. According to him, out of the $132 million, only $45.2 million is obtained from donors such as the United States President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, then the Global Fund, creating a support deficit of $86.8 million. He disclosed this at a workshop to review and prioritize the focal country collaboration project, which was organized by Send Ghana in Accra yesterday. And finally, quoting him, he says, "You may think the $45.2 million donor support is enough, but the cost of the HIV drugs, test kits, reagents, and other supplies are very expensive because they are produced outside the country and we have to import them." So, containing flooding, building on water bodies and all of that, and the Ministry for Works and Housing together with the National Security Ministry and what they're doing, and of course the $132 million fight against HIV yearly with the yawning deficit of $86.8 million. Any reactions, Doc?
Yes, I'll start with the flooding and the issues associated with it. This problem we have been, faced with this every year. It has become an annual ritual that we have flooding, and anytime there's rain, we experience that. We are in this country. We have set up planning department. We have set up all the institutions that make sure that people build based on permit and that they don't just build anyhow. So it always surprising to me that we continue to talk about these things, because I believe that we should be at the end of this problem for a very long time if our planning and our assemblies are acting the way they ought to be. This morning I heard the news item that they are now, the assemblies are working with the national security to pull some buildings. That we have heard this story time and again.
Right.
When will this narrative change? The change I want to see is that they enforce the rules governing the build industry. You obtain permit before you build, so that when, if you are going to build at a place that will create a problem, they will prevent you.
But that's the whole point, isn't it, Doc? Sometimes you see people constructing edifices and they have permits, but these are waterways. These are places ordinarily they shouldn't build. So you ask yourself, how did they secure permits to build in such places in the first place? What happened to the system? Only for the problem to rear its ugly head and then for us to, cry wolf. What happened in the first place? And even if they did not secure permits in those instances, how come we looked on till an edifice had been completed? What happened to our metropolitan assemblies and all of that? So those are the questions, are they not?
Yes, I think I agree with you. And these are the same things, sentiment I'm reoccurring here. Because who permitted them? That's why we have planning, we have department, we have assembly and all that. They have to make sure that people go through the process. The institutions might work, but if you have institutions that exist on paper and are not strong to stem the tide, I'm afraid we'll continue to come back here next year to discuss this issue. So if we want to address the issue, we know how to do it. If you don't want, we'll continue to have this. Let's look at the HIV issue. It is unfortunate that we don't have sufficient funds to combat it. If you look at the effects on the working population, on lives, you expect that the state will be in the position to fund programs of this nature to save its, people. It brings to mind the problem of our weak capacity in, funding programs that are our own and of great importance to us. Is it the case that we have won the battle for independence totally? We are still depending upon donor agencies to survive. And it brings to sharp focus the statement by Kwame Nkrumah that you will be free, but there is another type of colonial rule that you are going to face after independence. We are in here. We are not able to support programs that are of importance to ourselves. We have to depend on others for survival. And that the day that they hold us to ransom, we are hot. I believe we need to read well what Nkrumah said and then plan our country according to our ability. That's the way to go.
That is the way to go. Let's look at some more stories quickly from the Ghanaian Times newspaper. Now, President cuts short for €5 million vaccine manufacturing factory at Media. And President Akufo-Addo performed a groundbreaking ceremony yesterday for work to begin on the construction of a vaccine manufacturing factory at Media in the Gan West municipality of the Greater Accra region, known as the DEC Vaccines Limited, and supported by the European Investment Bank with an amount of the €5 million. The project is expected to be completed in 2024. Now, the DEK, or DEC, is a private sector-led consortium of Ghanaian pharmaceutical companies comprising of Danadams, Ernest Chemists, and Kinapharma. The factory will have the capacity of manufacturing 600 million doses of various vaccines every year, including vaccines against malaria, HPV, pneumonia, rotavirus, and cholera. Those are the details there, at least the most salient ones I'd like to take. But let me turn now to page 20 and look at this story. The International Monetary Fund has been urged to consider increasing concessional financing to Africa and also relax the eligibility criteria for poverty reduction and growth trust resources. The governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison, who made the call during the 2023 Africa Consultative Group meeting with the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, in Washington, D.C., USA last Sunday, said that would ensure timely financing assistance to the most vulnerable members. The meeting was on the theme addressing debt challenges and enhancing debt management to improve access to finance in Africa. It tells you right off the top that we're only looking for more and more assistance and maybe thinking less and less outside of the box. You remember the Secretary General of the AFTA said to us that going to the IMF and these Bretton Woods institutions is actually not the way to go for Africa. What we need is intra-Africa trade to boost that, to ensure that we have such a seamless system that we are trading more on the continent. If you look at the trade of the continent with other parts of the world, and then you look at the continent's trade within, it's a pittance. It's something we cannot, write home about. So those are the thoughts there. And on the bit about, going back to the bit about the vaccine manufacturing factory, looking at the time it has taken to even get this off the ground. Okay, it's all well and good. But Mr. President, all I will say is let this not be another pipe dream, another elephant project where a promise is made. I mean, we've seen that with a number of facilities that have been promised when it comes to hospitals, when it comes to that hospital in the La area, we all know, razed to the ground, not to be built again. Now, people in that community have to go quite a distance just to get medical assistance. So, Mr. President, we've cut the sod. Let's finish this before the end of your tenure, so it doesn't turn out to be, and assuming another party comes to power, then it would be, and we couldn't complete it, and they have also done this, and there are checks, and you never get it completed. If it will be done, let it be done well now. Doc, over to you.
Yes. I'll look at the Basin story. It's heartwarming, but I also acknowledge your input and what you have said. It's a good thing that the program that we start, we get to it finish end. But it's a good thing because if you look at the problem of, infections and pandemic and all that, the way to go is to develop vaccine.
Right.
I was listening to the U.S. and the disease control department and the money that they pump into this exercise.
Yeah.
Looking at how, because from their statistics, every 10 years, the world is likely to experience some epidemic. So they are always pragmatic and progressive and preparing towards that. So if my country is moving towards that direction, however slow the process will be, I think I support the president on that call. Let us also remember that the president started this initiative right after the COVID time, where he put up a team headed by Professor, the surgeon was the name, Professor Kosa. Right. And then in no time, they've worked and then submitted, I'm sure they've submitted their report, and then we are getting somewhere. Because this is how countries such as Vietnam, which has become an important place for vaccine development, they all developed. And today, they are giants in that era. So I think we will support the president to finish this project so that one day our country will be also a center for production of word vaccines and will be able to address some of the health challenges that require the use of word vaccines. I think it's a good project. We want to look at the IMF story and the point about the fact that the IMF is not a way out to our problem. It's where I stand. You will go there because you are members when you are in need, and then you go there for a bailout.
Right.
But in our situation, it's gradually becoming a habitual thing that we mismanage the economy, and then we rush there because there's always an assistant. They don't care a hoot about those of us who are going to be the direct beneficiaries of the effect of the policies of the IMF. I have seen growing up in the 1980s and 90s, the IMF conditionalities and its toll on workers and the economy, on livelihoods. It's not a good thing at all. So we always expect that government will govern based on sound or prudence measures so that we don't get there, that we go there sparingly, and that is beyond our control. But there are some of these things that send us there. You realize that it's just nothing but what a carelessness on the part of government, and then they send us there. And for me, that is the worrying point, that there are things we could avoid if we will listen to people with ideas, if we are sober and then allow stakeholders to also come in, than to govern as if it is what? An individual affair. Governance is not a private business that you do and you don't want anybody to, you don't want to listen to anybody. It is a continuum and a dialogue, and that you have to listen to stakeholders. So if we are not able to change our attitude and we don't govern based on the dictates of the governance criteria and processes, I'm afraid we will build a country, destroy it, go to IMF, come back, get conditions which are so harsh for us, and at the end of the day, the cycle continues, and we'll not be able to build a Ghana that we call our own, where we are independent, free from controls from institutions and other bodies which give us support. That is the way to go. Otherwise, we will continue to be in this problem forever and ever. I don't wish my country on that score, but it is my fears and the genuine fears I'm expressing. And I want my leaders to take charge and build a better Ghana for all of us.
Take charge and build a better Ghana. Whether they'll listen, leaders in, leaders out, that is the question. Well, the Daily Guide, I am for Bawumia, Joe Wise says so. Joseph Osei-Owusu, first Deputy Speaker of Parliament. And tour workers protest over shutdown and Nanakat sought for vaccine plant. We've looked at that. Government to demolish 785 buildings on waterways. We've also looked at a story related to that. Atoforsen to call 9 witnesses. So let's take some quick looks at the stories and get your reactions. First Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Joseph Osei-Owusu, says he supports Vice President Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia leading the MPP in the 2024 general election because he represents Ghana's future. He asserted that Dr. Bawumia stands out as a true leader qualified to lead Ghana because of his work in digitalizing the country's economy, adding that 118 MPs were campaigning for him to be the NPP's flag bearer. Now, Mr. Osei-Owusu, nicknamed Joe Wise, who is also the Member of Parliament for Bekwai, stated that digitization had taken over the world and that was where the Vice President was guiding the country. Then there's also Minority Leader and former Deputy Minister of Finance, Cassiel Atoforsen, has indicated his intention to call 9 witnesses in the ongoing trial in which he and 2 others have been accused of causing financial loss to the state. I'm sure you remember the bit about the ambulances. And just to wrap with page 6, there is also that story. Workers of Ghana's only refinery, Tema Oil Refinery, have begun a protest against the management and government for failing to ensure the availability of crude oil for processing. The workers, clad in red attire and bands, on Tuesday, April 18, 2023, marched to the entrance of the company after holding a staff durbar. they issued a notice that they would move their protest to the Ministry of Energy and the presidency to push the authorities to revive the ailing refinery. So, Tor workers shutting down the plant, so to speak. Joe Wise, Joseph Osei-Wusu, saying he's for Bawumia, and after forcing to call 9 witnesses. The bit about Joe Wise, though, I find it interesting how many of these bigwigs in the MPP are throwing their support behind this or that candidate when, in fact, the party has directed that they should abstain from doing so. We saw some members of parliament accompanying one of them to Menchia, another group accompanying the other bit, assertions of paying off members of parliament, so to speak, to support this or that candidate. And recently it was Aikwe Otu, former Attorney General, who said it was time for Alan Tremating. Now it is the first Deputy Speaker saying he's throwing his weight behind the Vice President. What do you make of all these developments?
I'll look at your wife's story, and you have, put it more succinctly and forcefully. That why do you build institutions and then turn around to destroy them? Institutions that regulate the conduct of people within parties. You set up rules that the rules of the engagement are that you wait till the time is announced so that anybody who is interested can stand for election, and then you canvass for vote and the rest of them. What are we saying? Is it the case that we don't have leaders within the party who will crack the whip and all that? So institutions are broken down within the party level. That we have to admit that. But there is a cost to it if authorities within the party don't act and act fast. It opens the floodgate for people to abuse those institutions, and it doesn't augur well for a meaningful party such as an MPP.
Right.
It is not the best. But look at the pusher of party members and then the support for one candidate or another. It is not new. Joe Wise's decision, nobody fault him for that. He has that right to do so. But there's no doubt that Dr. Bawumia is a fine gentleman, a scholar of great importance. Economics, he knows it. There is no doubt. There is politics of it, but where I sit, I know him as a great economist. There's no doubt about that. His candidature, there's nothing wrong, he contesting or expressing interest to lead his party. But there are questions that await him. And the question is, in spite of all his knowledge, why are we here in such economic situation, such a conundrum? And that question is the $1 million for my vice president. I'm not the one to answer it. He has questions, he has answers for it. And we are only waiting for the time that their programs will be on board. And then some of these questions will come out and then we see the responses. But there's nothing wrong. People rooting for them and all that. All that we are saying that let them respect the rules of the game. Let them also be mindful of the fact that they are building a solid democracy for their party. Right. And that anything that goes across the line will have deliberate influence on their party going forward. I'm sure they are not oblivious of this fact.
Well, to wrap the entire conversation, the Finder, just one story, and it's interesting because EOCO has seized 95 luxury cars suspected to be stolen. Some of them are not in custody. And then the Ghanaian publisher, IGP, tells MPP NDC, do your politics, we'll do police work. And that's the latest on that front. Any parting words for us before you take leave of us, Doc?
Yeah, quickly. I'll bring in the Tor story. Tor is an important facility which was built to save us from all the challenges we'll have with fuel and the stories associated with them. And here you are. Every time there's one crop problem or another, when will Tor problems be over?
Big question.
Why are they complaining about raw material? Is it the case that we cannot, purchase materials for them to work and all that? Why are we doing this thing to ourselves? Two important organizations that they always, when I hear a story like that, I have goose pimples on my body. And that is VACO and Tor. Right. These are facilities that Nkrumah built to support the effort of Ghana. And you and I know the importance of this. Why are we where we are? It's unfortunate. But I believe that we will right the wrongs one day and make our country proud and ourselves proud.
Thank you, Doc, for joining the conversation. And your hope is my hope as well. Hopefully, together, we can help get our country there. Dr. Kwame Asah-Asante, thank you so much for your time. He is a political scientist and, of course, director of the Center for European Studies at the University of Ghana. Before we get into sports and tell you all about how Chelsea lost that opportunity to progress to the semi-finals of the UEFA Champions League, this segment, as always, brought to you by Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic. They are offering free prostate screening, free female fertility screening, wherever you lie on the spectrum. You can find them in Accra, Spintex opposite the Shell signboard, Kumasi Krono Mabwehia behind the Angel Educational Complex. There is Takrady Anaji Estate, Tema Community 22, Techiman Hanso and Siama in Zimba. Reach them on 0244 867 068 or 0274 234 321. Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, the end to chronic disease. The end of the news review and the start of sports up next.